wearing many hats at one time. That's a COO in general. You have to wear a lot of hats and you also don't get a lot of credit for it. And be cool with that. Like just being in there and building, not really worrying about what it is, but getting to the end product and seeing something almost like it's a baby and growing it up to something. You're now integrating talent around the world into your company to help it grow. And that's a huge growth lever for anybody. For the smaller businesses, it is a challenge to accept that and understand it. And but here, I've heard it multiple times, like, oh, I feel like I'm just outsourcing my business. You're not. You're still keeping people in the States, maybe a smaller team, but you're expanding your overall operations. Going offshore and nearshore is not the end of U.S. hiring or the end of you being able to control your business with local talent. You're capitalizing on it. Companies just coming in and taking that leap and hiring somebody and delegating, letting go of what they think they need to be doing or having somebody do locally and seeing it actually work in another country very effectively is what's really moving the needle here.
So we chatted with Ben Surman today, the COO of Somewhere.com. Somewhere is an interesting company because they're one of these early new modern players in the hiring overseas slash outsourcing overseas space. So you've got like a handful of companies, Somewhere being one of the most notable. They used to be called Shepherd, Athena's another. And a lot of these companies started focusing on helping mostly US based startups and small businesses hire EAs in the Philippines or Latin America and so forth. And now you've got a bunch of these coming out of the woodworks, but these guys were one of the first or second companies to do it in a much more modern way. And they're also a bootstrap company, so they've raised no venture money. So he's had an interesting journey into startups. He was at Uber before this, was really early at Somewhere. And then Somewhere has also been bought recently by a buyer group by Nick Huber, who's big on Twitter. So interesting guy, interesting conversation. We went pretty deep on hiring remotely because this is something I've been thinking about a lot recently for our company. So hiring remotely, especially hiring folks overseas, integrating them into your culture and all that good stuff. So I think this is a good conversation with some good insights, especially for people that are thinking about hiring overseas.
So we got Benjamin Surman on the call. He's the COO of Somewhere.com, formerly known as Support Shepherd. Before, Benjamin was the COO of Somewhere, where he actually had a very interesting path, going from a consultant to the head of growth to then becoming the chief operating officer. He was an early employee over at Uber Eats, did a bunch of different ops roles. And actually, that's where the first time I ever met Benjamin was. I used to work with Kelly, his wife, superstar operator herself. We probably should get her on the pod as well at some point, just to talk through all things finance and accounting.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. So one thing I did want to bring up and talk about in the context of Shepherd, well, now Somewhere, and generally like hiring people overseas is, and I think it's important that people understand this. Some folks on Twitter might have been following this rise, but generally like a lot of tech companies, startups, small businesses, like lower mid-market PE type companies are starting to hire overseas in a way that they didn't before. It's kind of like the larger side of small business, venture-backed startup to mid-market companies, or just generally people are hiring EAs, they're hiring maybe accountants, even in some cases like staffing like real marketers, copywriters, and tech and engineers. A lot of venture-backed founders I know are hiring engineers now from overseas markets. So I think it's like an interesting trend. And while this isn't new, for instance, BPOs have been around a long time, but they were mostly focused on enterprise companies. Like the companies doing a lot of this will staff up a call center in the Philippines, or we'll staff up a bunch of accountants in India. That was mostly large enterprise company. Like the big four accounting firms have done this for years. Almost every enterprise either has something outsourced overseas or they work with a firm that helps them outsource their call center of everyone doing like answering phone calls for Progressive Insurance overseas. That's a thing that's been around, but it's mostly been done by large enterprise companies or businesses serving these large enterprises. So I think what's really the new thing is one, I guess maybe on the engineering side, some of that is just like the fact that there have been some successful tech companies elsewhere and more democratization of technical education that you've now got talent pools that didn't exist before. But then some of it is the fact that people like Somewhere, and I think maybe one or two other companies, like Athena is another that comes to mind, have really pioneered making this much more accessible to a lot of these other companies. Because really before, only large companies could access the firms that, or afford the firms that really were good at finding this type of talent. So that's one thing. But it is like this access to an international talent used to primarily be through these like companies that only served large enterprises and now is accessible to even a really small startup or small business. I really credit folks like Somewhere and another being Athena with EAs and Jason Calacanis just did a big investment there. So a handful of these companies really open up this market to where now it's If I, as a startup founder who has zero network, never lived in, never worked in, has no clue how to go hire EAs or engineers or like back office operations folks or even like marketers in India, the Philippines, Nigeria, wherever. Like there's no way that with my resources and my network, I'm going to be able to do a good job of that. Or if I am, it's going to be a ton of work for me. You basically democratize the access to finding talent like this, vetting them, building up the network that you need in that market to make people even aware of you, and then making it a lot easier. And so that's really what Somewhere has helped pioneer along with a few other companies in this space. So I think that's the context. It's like maybe helpful for folks. It's like this was not a thing really until the last 3 to 5 years, maybe, where companies like yours helped pioneer this new wave of where all of a sudden this is a thing that operators like myself are aware of and or have started using and just made it accessible to us. It's been almost like the bit of like you've educated the market on this and you've created a product and service that makes it more available, affordable to a lot more of these companies.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool. Okay. So you're today currently COO of a company that I even still until recently thought of it as Support Shepherd, but now it's called Somewhere. We're going to talk about the rebrand hopefully in a second here, but you went from consultant to head of growth to COO. And I don't think that's super common. Like most people usually, if they're like going to end up as like COO, the entry door is not usually as a consultant. So I'd love for you to just walk us through how that happened.
Yeah, so I've always kind of approached myself as the janitor. I'm just always behind the scenes, making sure things work as they should to get to wherever it is. Like ultimately, all of this comes back on Marshall for trusting me and a good leader and a good founder, if you will, to be able to trust other people, like just taking that leap and trusting people. But it wasn't my first time in terms of guiding businesses to better operations, more revenue, so on and so forth. The government business that we have equity in, Kelly and I. We grew that from basically total failure to a multi-million-dollar business, previous businesses as well, friends and just clients of scaling their brands. And so it is by all means abnormal to go from consultant to head of growth to COO, but that was just really me being in the trenches and Marshall seeing that day in and day out, not only just in the work itself with the teams, but also P&L speaks, right? I think we've all seen Shepherd go from nothing to something. Part of that was a very big team effort, but that was also mostly, unfortunately, me really wearing many hats at one time. And that's kind of a COO in general, right? You have to wear a lot of hats and you also don't get a lot of credit for it. I'd be cool with that. Like just being in there and building, not really worrying about what it is, but getting to the end product and seeing something almost like it's a baby and growing it up to something. But yeah, ultimately, Marshall's trust really drove that factor there. And obviously what I did in terms of improving operations, building out teams. When I first jumped on as just a consultant to kind of get the bearings straight for him, everything was being ran out of a Google sheet. And for me, that was not abnormal. A lot of that happened at Uber Eats. You know, there's a lot of things that were just ran out of a Google sheet and it is what it is. Like, let's build from there. And so from that, got out of the Google Sheets and Airtables, moved into the CRM, started collecting data, going through that whole showdown of what do we not know that we don't know, what do we know that we don't know, so on and so forth, and uncovering all these challenges and turning those challenges into revenue generating opportunities that have gotten us to where we are today.
I feel like every single SaaS product in the world, like at some point in time, if you go far back enough, it started in Excel or Google Sheets. So that is the beginning of everything. But so you have that Uber experience then. You've kind of done the success in scaling businesses a few different times, it sounds like. I'm curious, you talked about like being that operator that's behind the scenes. And as a role, operators often are behind the scenes. Like we recently interviewed a VP of Finance and Ops at a startup here in New York. She mentioned their team is super public, but our interview with her was the first that she'd ever done before. And so I do think operators tend to be behind the scenes. And also they tend to work really closely with founders, especially in a role like the one you came in where you were kind of the first person to really be there besides one of the founders that had like something of a major leadership position and influence. In terms of earning that trust with the founder and working with founders really well, are there things that you've learned that you think have made you especially successful in environments like Shepherd?
That's a great question. I think really just like I said, it kind of boils down to proving your worth. And it's hard to do, right? Like if you're 1 out of 100 people, proving your worth is something unique. A lot of that comes down to networking as well. I was pure luck that Marshall lives about 10 minutes from me. We had no idea that we lived that close to each other, but we were able to create that type of relationship in person. And I think that kind of also goes into, in a remote world, belly to belly, if you will, still matters. And being able to sit down with him and actually go through numbers and go through ideas, processes, improvements, so on and so forth, it was really the secret sauce to my success of growing at Somewhere.
Yeah, I actually think that it almost brings me to what I think will be a good way to segue into talking about the Somewhere journey, especially some of the recent news that I know. I actually think this happens to a lot of people. If you sell a company, if a new CEO takes over, if there's like, if you're venture backed and all of a sudden private equity comes in, like if there's some major ownership shift in a business or like leadership shift or both, that's also going to change like who's kind of calling the shots. And so if you're that operator that's like proven and done it, does it feel like when that ownership shift happens, you have to prove it all over again to whoever the new CEO or the new ownership group is?
Yeah, I think that's going to be like a instance by instance situation. Prior to, I had a great relationship working with Nick whenever he came in as an affiliate, and then later equity holder. Same with Sean. They all got to see what I was doing as well. And as I was fully aware of the deal itself, Marshall keyed me in right from the get-go of when that first text message hit of like, hey, I want to buy Shepherd, which is very exciting for anybody. So I was to that point, like side by side with Marshall and like, does this thing work? Yes or no? And how am I going to work with Nick? I was also very fortunate that Nick, as he learned more and more about what I was doing rather than just being on the outside, he was very adamant that I stay. And so I think a lot of people come to that conversation as well. Like, do you stay or do you go? Do I want you to stay or do I want you to go? And having somebody come in who's buying the majority of the company and saying, please stay, was also just a great go to bat for me. Not to boost my ego, something like that when, Nick Huber comes in and says, don't leave, like that's, pretty great. So yeah, I think situation is going to vary by anybody, but I think if you happen to get in at ground floor, working directly with founders and owners, you're really going to make a mark for yourself. And regardless of who comes in, they're not going to want you to leave. If anything, they're going to want to build teams around you more than anything.
Yeah, it's a big vote of confidence.
For sure. So, of course, like having the new owner come in saying, hey, we'd love to keep you as much as, and we'll figure out some kind of like new comp plan, whatever it may be. I'm actually super curious, like, how did you decide to stay versus, okay, maybe it's time for to go to a different opportunity besides the ownership coming in saying, hey, we'd love to keep you?
Yeah, for me, this has kind of become my own baby. I've seen it go from 6 digits to where it is today, all within a very short period of time. In addition to that, there's a great team behind Somewhere. It's not just me. It's not just Nick or Sean or Marshall. There's 150 people that have been making this thing grow rapidly. And so I kind of, in a way, owe it to them to make sure that this exchanges well and continues to grow. So for me, that was just a personal choice. I most definitely could have walked away, but we're just beginning. We are definitely going somewhere. And so I want to continue to be a part of that.
So then I got to ask about the name too, right? So you get bought, great outcome for Marshall and you and the rest of the team, right? A lot of people know the name, Support Shepherd. I know we even maybe transitioned over the name Shepherd, but then you switch over to Somewhere, right? And I think I even saw Nick Huber say that he spent 300, 400K on the domain. So I just got to ask, like, why the rebrand? Why the purchase of I think, a relatively expensive like domain name? Why make the switch?
Yeah, I'm sure as an operator, you're aware that wasn't just an overnight situation. It's been long in the works. Much due diligence across the board, even just trying to get Shepherd, just the root domain. It really came down to like, hey, we got to change the name. Like, it's beautiful, but it doesn't make sense. People all over the place get it wrong, Trying to be branded as Shepherd, but then our legal agreements are Support Shepherd. And you hear various podcasts all one go refer to Support Shepherd and Shepherd, 2 different names in one episode. The misspelling of Shepherd. It was all just adding up over time. And so that was like, hey, we got to boil this down to something simple. There's obviously a lot of feedback on whether or not somewhere.com was the right idea, but I would love to say it was a beautiful brainstorming session, but it was merely sitting on the couch, scrolling through Brand Bucket and all these, various platforms that have domains, just spitballing via text message with everybody. Like, does this work? How could we play this in a slogan? And eventually we came to Somewhere and like, kind of sticks. Jobs.somewhere. Anything else you want to put before Somewhere? We have a great root domain to work with. You're not going to misspell it. And so it came about and we went for it. We acquired it and it's been a long process getting there. A beautiful picture at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of change in one go. So I feel like if you are going to do it, you might as well just stack it all up and that way it all happens at once and boom, you're done.
And I imagine Nick has tweeted a lot about the value of a domain name recently. And there's a lot of people who've always been pro, put the money into a very expensive domain name. Unfortunately, it's real estate. People buy them and they hold out for the day that they're going to get a 5, 6, 7-figure exit from a $9 domain name, right? It does change. Our business has drastically changed because of that domain name and the brand change and some of the branding that we've brought with it, a more polished look in terms of like our videos that we're producing, involving candidates, who they're getting hired with and what they're doing. That has changed our business and it's made us grow up, if you will. It's added a lot of value to the business in terms of the accounts are larger. More enterprise brands are taking us seriously. More people understand who we are, what we do, and it's kind of behind us now. We don't have to explain our name. We can just tell you what we do, and we can help you grow your business from there.
So I actually think that's like a great transition point. We wanted to talk a lot about the international hiring market, remote work, how operators should think about that today. So I feel like you guys, so for all of this context, Shepherd and now Somewhere, I think it was initially branded more along hiring executive assistants and then you've expanded from there. And now you've started to see in the last few years, like a bunch of people get into the space. And grand scheme of things, like the BPO space itself, it's kind of old. It's been around for forever. It's not like a new concept. And so I'm just curious, like, why do you think that this has become such a hot space all of a sudden? Like, why are there so many new companies spreading up here? And why is there so much demand from companies that I don't think historically bought or were seeking out to work with folks like you to hire people internationally?
Yeah, I think people are obviously seeing it work, seeing it stick. Like I said earlier, getting to the point of why didn't I do this sooner? Outsourcing, this is always kind of a hard one to wrap your head around for some. Outsourcing is out, global workforce is in, and because of that, our business is taking off. Other businesses are obviously to catch on with it as well. To your point, like RPOs and BPOs have always existed, but that's just a totally different creature, right? You're now integrating talent around the world into your company to help it grow. And that's a huge growth lever for anybody. For the smaller businesses, it is a challenge to accept that and understand it. And I've heard it multiple times, like, oh, I feel like I'm just outsourcing my business. It's like, you're not. You're still keeping people in the States, maybe a smaller team, but you're expanding your overall operations. And it's a roundabout way of, you have 2 people in the States, you have 5 people in Colombia, 10 people in the Philippines. The next thing you know, you're hiring somebody else stateside. Look at us. Great example. Our own leadership team is all stateside. We have a few sales reps and account managers that are also stateside. Going offshore and nearshore is not the end of U.S. hiring or the end of you being able to control your business with local talent. You're capitalizing on it. As more and more businesses start to accept that and make moves on it, hiring these people in the Philippines, LATAM, South Africa, Eastern Europe, they see it work, they start talking about it. And they start talking about the similar operators. From there, it's just a brush fire. I think the real estate business itself is great because they don't really do anything unique. Like, it's all kind of the same thing. It's a money game, right? And for them, where's a great spot to save some money? It's your offshore, nearshore teams and grow from there. And then they all tell each other they don't have anything proprietary. It's real estate. And that's grown the business a ton. Companies just coming in and taking that leap and hiring somebody and delegating, letting go of what they think they need to be doing or having somebody do locally and seeing it actually work in another country very effectively is what's really moving the needle here.
That makes a lot of sense. So I was a startup like CEO at a company called First Base. A lot of a team was powered by our global talent. But I had to educate myself a lot. Like, what is the difference between outsource versus global talent versus nearshore, offshore?
Right.
For our audience who's never heard those before or trying to get as educated as possible, what would just be the quick and dirty summary between global talent versus outsourcing versus any other terms that you might think should be so important to go through?
I think you should realize that outsourcing is more or less you've created the SOP and you're going to send it off to a giant office building somewhere in Manila. And there's going to be a team that's just constantly churning, people coming in and going who just operate off of your playbook, right? BPO is a great example. Whenever you start looking at global workforce, you're looking at people who are general managers and they're actually running your business. Property managers, they're managing your property. Obviously the developers and so on and so forth. And you're integrating them in with your team. To that point as well, like, it's not just U.S. businesses. There are international businesses looking for U.S. talent. This is why I say it's a global workforce now. It is truly changing. You don't ever hear that story as often as you hear about U.S. companies. Maybe it's just because it doesn't have that stick for the clickbait. But international businesses are definitely hiring elsewhere as well. And that's what's really driving this global workforce.
Yeah, I feel like on that point, I've definitely seen it in startups I've worked at. I'm based in New York. I would say that probably 2 out of every 3 startups I know is hiring a lot internationally. And it's gone beyond just even being, I don't know, we hire some executive assistants, stuff like that. People are hiring engineers. People are even building like the majority of their team in other countries. But at the same time, for me, things that I fear as a founder is like one, I don't want to have a culture of like folks in the US and then folks internationally. And it's kind of like just very clearly not the same cohesive team. That's something that scares me. And then two, I'm very like skeptical. Can we actually like I'm not in the Philippines, I'm not in Brazil, I'm not in Nigeria. Like how can I really be confident that I'm gonna find the best talent? And so I'm just curious. Obviously this is like your whole shtick, but I'm curious what your take is on this, especially for someone like me who's very much trying to keep that really high quality bar from day one and keeping a really cohesive culture.
Yeah, that's where our team comes in, and they do a fantastic job of taking what profile it is that you would want to hire and showing you that there are other people in this world somewhere that have the same exact profile, if not better. And then you actually get to interview them and meet with them, and you actually have a conversation with them. You've probably not had these conversations, right? And once you actually talk to these people and question them to your standard, your mind does start to change, and you start to become a little bit more open. And that's kind of like what this is all about. It's like, yes, there's great talent here. Don't get me wrong. But there's still obviously great talent everywhere. And that's the beauty of, being able to leverage our team and the tools that we also use to find these people and present them to you. Other than you just jumping onto LinkedIn or Indeed or Well Found, whatever, and finding people that match your criteria, we're actually expanding that out and showing you what actually is the match.
Yeah. What is that like first interview? Like, what is that an actual like first engagement? So I come to you and say, hey, I need someone to help with like operations and filings. Like, we're in the tax business and I'm nervous that I can find someone that's good enough. Like, does our process start with like, we're just going to interview some people? How do you typically get the skeptic like me to be exposed to the process? Because it sounds like meeting people is really where the unlock happens.
Yeah. So that's where we really do our own deep criteria on our own recruiters and sourcing team to find what matches. And so we get to understand what it is that your business needs. We've really ingrained in our team, like treat our clients' business as if it's your very own business, because their success is going to be our success. So we really start to understand what it is that you're looking for and dissecting it and finding it, almost fine tuning that to be as complicated as it may need to be for us to go and find the right talent. We then screen. We'll get, let's just say 50 people to apply. That's not an accurate number on every application. We handle all the screening and interviewing and drill it down to 5 good people. And then we'll present those to you. And those are the 5 that we feel that are the top of what's applied and also the top of what we've gone out and found. It's not always just post a job and see what comes in. We have our own talent pool that we're always actively maintaining, keeping up to date, finding the best talent, making sure that the best talent is in our talent pool and getting them assigned. You get to see just on paper right out of the gate, this is who I'm looking at. Then we schedule those interviews. You get those interviews going. I would say 9 times out of 10, that very first interview, the client comes back like, wow, why did I not start this sooner? You're going to hear that over and over again. They come in for 1 hire. Now all of a sudden they want to hire 3 people. Like, hey, I interviewed these 3, but I want to hire all of them because they're all amazing and they're going to really help my business grow. And so it comes down to like the experience. And there's a lot of people that will say like, oh, you're overpriced or high. You could do managed services elsewhere, so on and so forth. But we really do bring a white glove service to it. And even to that point, we allow you to do, if you wanted to, a trial period. So say you want to get somebody in on like a 30-day trial just to see if they actually work in your systems, work with your teams. You're welcome to do that. If you want to do an assessment, we have plenty of clients that have their own given assessments that they would give to a stateside team for interviewing. We also have the candidates do that as well. So you can actually see exactly what you're getting through the entire process and making it as one-to-one as it would be you going out and finding whoever it is that you're trying to hire locally.
Yeah, so let's say we move down the process a little bit. You provide the talent, the client decides to hire that individual. Do you then also help educate the client on how to manage that employee? Because at least one of the concerns when I was in this position, as well as other concerns I've heard from other operators is, hey, I know how to manage an employee who's like stateside or even same time zone. I don't know how to manage someone from potentially a different culture, a different time zone, a different country. Oh my God, like what do I do with all this compliance stuff? So I'm curious, like, how much does somewhere help there? Or at least what are some general tips and tricks that you would give to an operator who's a little nervous about hiring someone from outside the States?
Yeah, full transparency on that one. We're navigating that as well. Since our business is changing, people need to understand how to integrate these teams better. We are working with more and more decision makers at companies in terms of who they're hiring, what they're hiring for. With that, like we do have just various high level education to get operators up to speed with their new hire. And like, this is what's going to happen in terms of like, building an SOP. It's almost crazy to see how many people don't even have an SOP to begin with and already have 10 people working for them. Helping them go through that process of like, this is how you develop a SOP. Marshall did a great little delegation course. It's up on the website that people can do, basically like a mini crash course on how to manage your new hire. We are working on expanding that to be more involved with the actual handoff and ongoing training as well. Like, how are you going to integrate, let's just say 5 system admins with your engineering team stateside? What does that look like? What tools do you need to use? I've been on plenty of calls myself where I talk to the owners directly and say, hey, what tools are you using? Let's see, are they the right tools? Are they the wrong tools? What seats do you need to get your new hire? And how are they going to work with you day in and day out? So this is definitely one of those channels where we're currently going through it to figure out what's the best way to package it up and present it. Is it a free product? Is it a paid product? Is it included with every hire? And how do we scale that from just the guy who wants to hire one person for the year to the company that wants to hire 20 people with us in one go? And it's their first time hiring somebody, let's just say in Colombia. That's a huge learning curve. Nobody has really ever came back and said, this just isn't working out for me. Everybody gets through it. And once you boil it down to just kind of working async, which is, I think, a challenge still for a lot of people. Once you've gotten in that groove and start using Slack, Notion, so on and so forth, really getting looped in with who it is that you've hired, that uneasiness starts to just melt away.
I find that super surprising that you said that usually people work through it and figure it out. Because at least I think maybe I've talked to a few folks where they just have had like horror stories or nightmares, if you will, of hiring someone from abroad or other way around. Like I've talked to some people who I've hired and the former employee was just like not someone to work with. You're in the middle of that, right? I'm sure you probably have some gnarly problems that you've seen. Of course, no need to name drop or get too specific here, but we'd love to just hear an anecdote or two of somewhere, somehow, something messing up, and then you just having to parachute in to fix it.
Yeah, that goes both ways. We've heard of companies whose stateside teams just refuse to play nice. We've also heard of people who've hired in different regions outside of somewhere, then hired someone with us in the Philippines. And let's just say that they've hired someone in Eastern Europe. And then all of a sudden they hire people in the Philippines and they have a team in the US. All of a sudden you have cultural differences just flaring up and opinions and just mismanaged thoughts. And that kind of bubbles back up towards the operator themselves. What are you doing to champion people, man, and teamwork? Are you just hiring people and throwing them into your Slack channel and saying, hey, here's these new people we hired from the Philippines, work together? What are you doing? So having those conversations and guiding them through like, well, what is it that you're wanting these people to do that you've hired in the Philippines? What is your team in the US wanting to do? Are they going to be managers, team leads, so on and so forth? Or are they supposed to work side by side? If you're going to tell somebody in the States that you've just hired somebody in the Philippines to work side by side with you, they're going to feel like their job is on the chopping block. So you got to coach people in that direction of like, maybe don't do that if that's not your actual intention. And boiling it back down to the transparency of it all. If that is your intention, maybe don't make it so obvious. Put this person in as an assistant or something, or some other title to get them trained up as needed, because businesses are changing. But it's always a challenging one to navigate, especially whenever we're constantly growing and constantly hiring more people, different roles. We're the furthest from now of just hiring virtual assistants, EAs. We're hiring paralegals, architects, project managers, developers, analysts, you name it, we're hiring for it, right? All of those people already exist in different countries. Let's just say primarily the US with these companies. Writing can sometimes be on the wall if it's not something that is you building off of. If you're leveraging it for growth, it's a totally different conversation, and people can generally grasp that a little bit better. It's like, oh, the company's just wanting to improve their margins, right? Not necessarily that the company wants to fire me and outsource my job. So like I said, it's just a very challenging conversation to always have when it does come up. But fortunately, as our business has been growing, I think more and more people are doing a lot more research before just willy-nilly hiring somebody. Some people will use other platforms just to kind of try it out and see like, what can I do for $5 situation off of a 40-hour period, and then I'll go and hire somebody. We've kind of moved away from the days of just people. I saw this on Twitter. Seems like a great thing to do. Let me hire somebody. And what do I do with them? It's like, well, you're the one that wanted us to hire them. Find them,
And that whole list you had off too, you missed, I think, the most important one. It's executives. So me and you have talked about this a few times. I think the world more and more, like you mentioned, is going to this global talent strategy. I've hired CTOs, head of ops, as well as some other like executive roles in previous companies that was in, whether it's in Brazil, Argentina, elsewhere. We'd love to just hear from your point of view. Like, how do you think about hiring executives outside the US?
Yeah, obviously I'm going to be biased and tell you that's awesome. We just hired our head of people out of LATAM. She's amazing. She has a fantastic legal background as well. Fantastic people manager, understands anything that's people ops brilliantly. She was already on our team as a contractor. We've since extended the offer, brought her on. But yeah, for me, like, I've become very, like I said, biased towards the whole topic of it. For me, it's not uncommon to see COO jobs, CTOs, CMOs coming through our pipeline. The monthly budget, if you will, is dramatically increasing day over day. The larger companies and operators, they've had a taste with a executive assistant and a sales admin, some other people here and there, and they've put it all together and like, wow, I could actually have a CMO in the Philippines running my whole marketing team, and they go for it, and there's no looking back. And for them, it's like being comfortable doing so. It's just getting past that uncomfortable zone. And to that point, I think there's people who don't even want to travel out of America, much less hire out of America. So it's kind of the same feeling, if you will. But once you've ripped that Band-Aid off, it's not a problem.
Yeah, on that point, I think it was like Jack Altman recently who tweeted something about there's a big advantage to a startup having their CTO or head of engineering or whatever in another country, partially because it's not just a singular great engineer in another country. It's also they can hire other great engineers and folks in those places and actually start building up a real culture, like the same way you would if you had a killer CTO in New York that knows all the great engineers in New York. Like you're able to kind of build that cluster of talent. Like something I'm still struggling to get my head around as I think about doing more of this in the future is just like, what are the talent clusters if you think about around the world? Like I know the Big Four, it has something of a presence in like India, like different parts of Southeast Asia. There have been a few tech companies that have succeeded in LATAM. So you've got more engineers that are coming out of like Nubank and stuff like that. So I have some familiarity, but from your POV being someone in this space, like which regions do you think spike in which areas? Like if you almost picture a map of the hotspots for different types of talent, what does that look like?
Yeah, obviously where we've started, Philippines, Manila. When you look in LATAM, Colombia, Brazil, going up, Mexico City, and of course, South Africa, Eastern Europe. Seems that Japan's starting to hit the map quite a bit as of recently, mostly due to currency fluctuation, but there's still fantastic financial analyst talent that's out of Japan. Now it's becoming very cheap.
Yeah, if there's a currency fluctuation, I'm just going to go start like looking at that country. Just like, guys, we got to go hire some folks here. We can scoop talent for cheap.
I mean, you may be onto something. That's a lot of work.
I just got to get George Soros to like go short a couple nation states currencies. And that's all. So I guess maybe as like kind of driving towards the end here, one thing that I think ties around all of this is we have seen a lot of folks start getting into the space of trying to like, honestly, to me, like I could be wrong about this, but I know of there's you all, formerly Shepherd, now somewhere, and then Athena. And those are the two folks that kind of started, in my mind at least, this modern wave of just a lot more people trying to help companies like hire internationally. And I feel like you see some new bro on Twitter start a new one of these every month or so. And so I'm sure like, obviously this always happens when there's a trend and someone like you carves the path, there's going to be more of this, but I'm curious, I guess any hot takes on for people listening, what to be careful of and what to avoid? Because I think whenever you see this explosion, you've also got some people that are maybe not the best actors or who maybe don't do the best work. So anything, if you were looking at this landscape and seeing all these companies, or even honestly, like my DMs, I get DM'd by someone trying to tell me they can help me hire talent all the time. How would you recommend an operator, a founder, an executive think about what to look for when they're considering who they're going to work with?
Yeah, I would say in hindsight, after being in this business now for a few years, really building right from the start. And that comes back to like the legal aspect of things. Nobody wants to do anything legal when they're growing or starting. That's probably the best spot for you to ever start and understand what are my legal implications of hiring somebody in the Philippines or LATAM. Is it going to impact my business? Where am I based? What am I doing? And to that point, are you going to bring them on as an independent contractor? Are you going to make them employee? If you're going to go either direction, how are you going to make sure that you maintain those records? And so, to your point, there are a lot of managed services popping up. And if I was an operator, I would ask them, like, what are you doing to make sure that my data is being preserved? You're a managed service, so I'm paying you to pay somebody to come do work for me. How do I know that my information that I have them working on, if they're going to be in my HubSpot account, how do I know that everything's not going to be leaked? And what course of action can you take on behalf of me to go and do that? Same to that point, if you're going to be hiring that person directly, what firepower do you have to be able to manage that person properly and take any legal action as needed? It's the fact of the matter. When you hire people, legalities come up quite a bit. It doesn't matter if it's in America or the Philippines, it's going to come up and you have to take action. You need to understand what it is that you're going to do, what you're capable of doing. And if you really don't even have the revenues to afford an attorney to create you some proper terms of service, you probably don't really need to be hiring anybody in the Philippines who's going to be dealing with your client's private information. And I think that's, like, to your point, Andrew, there's some people that they don't really know that they're banking on that, but ultimately they are, and they're charging you $3,000 a month or whatever to hire somebody. And they haven't really put full thought into how they're going to manage these people. How are you making sure that everybody you're hiring in Brazil is going to be legally compliant for your business? And that's where, you come into these softwares like Deal and Remote.com. They're doing a great job of providing a service to do so. But that's the first step. And then the next step is plan in advance. If you're going to hire somebody, and this is props to Athena, they do a great job of training their teams. So they have a very robust training platform for executive assistants. And they have a little market there that they're definitely going after and providing great executive assistants for their clients that are trained up and they are properly managed, so on and so forth. But you have to mirror that. If you're going to hire somebody in the States, just because you're hiring them doesn't mean you don't have to pay taxes on them. Understand everything that you're getting into. But the SOP part, the person you're going to hire is only as good as much as you're going to train them. If you don't have an SOP, you don't have a playbook, you don't even really have an idea of what they're going to do, probably not time for you to hire somebody yet. I know there's a lot of FOMO that kind of comes about all of this Twitter talk and podcasts about hiring more people. It's like, does your business really need to hire more people? What is your expenditure going to look like? What is the proper pod for this organizational structure? That's where we're really tapping in right now with our new account managers, is building out actual teams for companies and having these very crucial conversations like consultants with the operators of these businesses. Like, what's your goal here? Why are you hiring 1, 3, 5? Are you hiring too many, too little? Are you hiring for the right roles? Do we need to break your job description up into 2 different roles? There's obviously a lot of people who are going to try to be budget friendly and say, hey, I want an executive assistant that can also be my social media marketer. Yes, maybe it exists out there. Yes, they can do that job, but is it going to be effective enough to help you grow the business? And having those conversations and saying, look, maybe you need an executive assistant out of the Philippines, but let's find you a marketing pro out of Brazil. And taking that approach and being more open-minded to how you're going to leverage global talent, not just outsourcing your booking of flights and managing your inbox. There's a lot of conversations you have to have. And as an operator, that's like your best start. Talk to the owner of whatever agency is that you're shopping. What can you do for me? What suggestions do you have for me in terms of this role? This is my business. This is my revenue. This is where I want to go. This is what we do. Help me determine who I need to hire. Treat those people as if they are your own head of people, not just a service business. Make them kind of integrated into your company as your now recruiting team in human resources department, and make them help you decide what is the best move, what's not the best move, what's the best location, what's the best role, and how does all that tie together with your end goal of your business.
Yeah, well said. So don't break the law. That's important. Pay taxes or work with someone who can help you do that. Be wary of security, which is actually an interesting point because I just had someone educate me recently that whenever you announce a round of funding, you are much more likely to get attacked by hackers. So be careful of those things. And then hopefully go work with someone who just really know what you're doing and what you need on the hiring front. Basically have your shit together. Don't just think someone's going to jump in and crush it with zero structure and zero thought behind what you're hiring them for, what the role is, and how you're going to make sure they're set up to succeed.
Have enough money to handle the lawsuits. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we're being sued by the Philippines. So we need to pay for those legal bills. That's the best Series A fundraise I can think of. This is a great episode. I think people are going to get a lot from this. I feel like I learned more than a few things about this topic. Where should people go to find you, to find somewhere like Twitter, LinkedIn? What's the best place?
Yeah, LinkedIn for me. If you have questions, feel free to email me. Just b@somewhere.com. Just the letter b@somewhere.com. Yeah.
It's a good email.
And I'll be able to point you in the right direction, whether you work with us or not. I love being a wealth of information as needed. That's why I'm excited to be part of Cornerstone now. Great to be able to share some knowledge, learn more as well.
Dude, I appreciate the plug. Didn't even mention it. So for everyone here, Cornerstone is like the private vetted community for COOs, VPs, and head of operations. If you're interested, we can just send up a link to join the waitlist.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us. And this was a lot of fun. Thank you for listening to the Operators Only podcast. We put a lot of work into this. So if you're on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever, hit like and subscribe, hit follow, leave a 5-star review. Makes me feel like it's not just my mom and my girlfriend that listen to this. And most importantly, please DM me any ideas that you have for how to make the show better, new guests that we should have on, new formats. I'm all ears to everything. We're trying to make this better. So if you have ideas, find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or whatever platform and hit me up. I want to hear how you think we can make this better. And with that, I'll see you next time.